A chasm in the earth holds more than just layers of stone. Beneath the familiar cliffs of the Grand Canyon, a forbidden story waits. One that claims this natural wonder is a tomb for Egyptian relics and the bones of giants, all hidden by a museum you are supposed to trust. By the end of this, you will possess the full, unsettling account of a discovery that could rewrite our past. We are going to examine a century-old newspaper article that describes an impossible underground city, explore why the Smithsonian insists it never happened, and confront the pattern of giant bones that vanished from the record. What does it mean when the guardians of history might also be its gatekeepers? The official story of the Grand Canyon is one of immense time and patient erosion. For millions of years, the Colorado River carved through layer after layer of rock, exposing a geological timeline that textbooks celebrate. Human history here is anchored by the ancestral Puebloan people, whose cliff dwellings and pottery shards speak of a deep, continuous connection to this landscape. This is the accepted narrative, a tale written in stone and taught in classrooms. But there exists another story, one printed in black and white yet dismissed as fiction, that insists the canyon holds a secret far older and stranger than anyone has dared to teach. This counter-narrative erupted into public view on April 5, 1909, in the pages of the Arizona Gazette. The article described an astonishing expedition led by a Smithsonian-affiliated explorer named G.E. Kinkaid. According to the report, while traveling down the Colorado River, Kinkaid noticed strange stains in the sedimentary rock about 2,000 feet above the riverbed. Investigating, he found the entrance to a cavern which he claimed led back into the earth for miles. What he described was not a natural cave, but a meticulously carved network of tunnels and chambers, an underground citadel. The article stated the rooms contained artifacts of a decidedly non-Native American character, including copper tools, statues resembling deities from the Nile, and walls covered in hieroglyphics. Most startling of all were the mentions of mummified remains and, crucially, skeletons of gigantic proportions, some measuring over 9 feet in length. This single newspaper report is the radioactive core of the entire mystery. It presents a complete, packaged anomaly, a story of a lost civilization with Egyptian ties and a race of giants, conveniently discovered and then, according to believers, conveniently buried. This is why it is a cornerstone of so-called forbidden archaeology, because it directly challenges two foundational pillars of mainstream history: that there was no transoceanic contact with the Americas before Columbus, and that tales of giants are purely mythological. The narrative from the Gazette does not just add a chapter to American prehistory, it proposes ripping out the existing table of contents and writing a new one. The conflict is absolute. Either a major metropolitan newspaper published an elaborate, detailed hoax for no clear gain, or one of the world's most revered institutions is sitting on a discovery that would turn our past inside out. The credibility of any discovery rests on the people who claim to have made it. So who were the architects of this incredible tale? The newspaper introduces us to two central figures, G.E. Kinkaid and Professor S.A. Jordan. According to the Arizona Gazette, Kinkaid was an experienced explorer and hunter, a man familiar with the rugged Colorado River. He is described as having the backing of the Smithsonian Institution for his journey. His account is the first-hand testimony, the eyes and ears inside the cavern. Professor S.A. Jordan, the article states, then took charge of the exploration. He is presented as a Smithsonian archaeologist who rushed to the site, mobilized a team, and began a thorough scientific investigation. These two names are the pillars upon which the entire story stands. But if you try to find these men in the official records of history, they vanish like smoke. Searches through Smithsonian archives, employee directories from the era, and academic publications yield no evidence of a G.E. Kinkaid leading a Grand Canyon expedition for the institution. There is no Professor S.A. Jordan listed as an archaeologist or anthropologist on their staff at that time. The Smithsonian itself has repeatedly and categorically denied any involvement in such a discovery, stating flatly that no expedition of this kind ever took place and that they have no records pertaining to it. This creates an immediate and profound dilemma. We are left with a detailed story from a seemingly legitimate newspaper, but the main characters in that story appear to be ghosts. One theory suggests these were pseudonyms, names used to protect the identities of real explorers or to add a layer of plausible deniability for the institution. Another, more skeptical view is that they were complete fabrications, characters invented to give a wild tale a veneer of scientific authority. The entire narrative hinges on a single source, that one article from April 1909. No follow-up reports in the Gazette, no photographs from the site, no scholarly papers published by Professor Jordan, no artifacts ever displayed. For a discovery billed as the most important in American archaeology, the trail goes cold the very next day. This singular source problem is what allows the story to exist in a strange limbo, impossible to fully prove but equally impossible to completely dismiss, because the only evidence we have is the story itself, a detailed map to a treasure that no one can seem to find again. The article paints a picture not of a simple cave, but of a subterranean metropolis engineered with startling precision. According to Kinkaid's account, the initial entrance led into a passage that stretched for over a mile back into the solid rock of the canyon wall. This was no rough tunnel, but a smooth, man-made corridor, wide enough to walk through comfortably and descending at a uniform grade. At its end lay the heart of the complex, a massive central chamber shaped like a cross. From this central hub radiated passages leading to what the report estimated were hundreds of individual rooms, each carved from the living stone. The engineering details are what make this story so compelling and so difficult to dismiss as mere fantasy. The article specifically mentions a sophisticated ventilation system, a series of shafts that rose from the caverns all the way to the surface, ensuring a constant supply of fresh air throughout the entire underground city. This single detail suggests a level of long-term planning and architectural knowledge that goes far beyond a temporary shelter or a ceremonial space. It implies a society that intended to live there and to live there comfortably for generations. The artifacts described add another layer of profound mystery. The rooms were said to contain copper vessels and tools of a hardness and craftsmanship unlike anything known from native cultures in the region. Most haunting were the numerous crypts where explorers reportedly found strange, dark brown mummies and the skeletal remains that fueled the legend of giants. The walls themselves told a story, covered in hieroglyphic characters that the article claimed bore a striking resemblance to those of ancient Egypt. When you piece this description together, the image that forms is not of an isolated tribe, but of a lost colony, a civilization with the knowledge to reshape a mountain from the inside out. The scale and sophistication described do not align with the archaeological understanding of the peoples known to have inhabited the Grand Canyon area. This dissonance is precisely what fuels the speculation of a transoceanic connection. Could this have been an outpost of a seafaring culture from across the Atlantic or Pacific, a group that carved their new home into the most defensible place imaginable, the very bones of the continent? The newspaper's description forces that question into the open, presenting a scene that feels both impossibly ancient and eerily advanced. But the artifacts described inside those rooms are what truly shatter conventional timelines. Beyond the engineering, the contents of this underground city pointed to a culture utterly alien to the American Southwest. The newspaper report detailed tablets covered in hieroglyphic writing, a system of symbols that bore a direct resemblance, according to the article, to the ancient script of the Nile Valley. This was not a vague similarity. The account specified characters that matched known Egyptian hieroglyphs. Even more striking was the description of a central idol found within the main chamber. It was said to be a cross-legged figure sitting in a posture of meditation. To the explorers, it resembled statues of Buddha, yet the article also noted its likeness to depictions of the Egyptian god Thoth, the deity of wisdom, writing, and magic, often shown in a seated position. This fusion of iconography is deeply puzzling, suggesting a cultural syncretism that has no place in the standard historical model for the continent. Alongside these spiritual items were practical objects, including copper tools and vessels of exceptional quality and hardness. Copper was used in the ancient Americas, particularly around the Great Lakes, but the advanced metallurgy implied here, coupled with the Egyptian aesthetic, creates a jarring anomaly. Then there were the crypts. The report states that side chambers served as burial vaults containing what were described as mummies. These were not the elaborate linen-wrapped figures of Egyptian pharaohs, but rather bodies preserved by the arid, sealed environment of the cavern, taking on a dark brown, almost black coloration. It is the combination of all these elements that forms the so-called Egyptian connection, a package of evidence that seems to have been teleported from the Mediterranean world and deposited into the heart of Arizona. If even a fraction of this report were true, the implications would be seismic. It would constitute undeniable proof of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact, not with vague, speculative crossings, but with a specific, advanced civilization capable of transporting its language, its religion, its technology, and its burial practices across an ocean. It would mean that chapters of human migration and cultural exchange are missing from our textbooks, that the ancient world was far more interconnected than we have ever allowed ourselves to believe. The story does not just add Egyptians to the map of the Americas, it suggests they established a substantial, enduring colony, carving a permanent home into one of the most formidable landscapes on Earth. This turns the Grand Canyon from a natural wonder into a potential archaeological site of unparalleled importance, a lost chapter written in stone and waiting, just maybe, to be read. Yet among all the artifacts described, one detail towers above the rest, both literally and figuratively. The Arizona Gazette article made a claim that would forever cement this story in the realm of the unbelievable. It reported the discovery of mummified remains of individuals measuring over 9 feet in length. Skeletons of enormous proportions. This is the element that transforms an archaeological mystery into a full-blown legend, tapping into one of humanity's oldest and most persistent fascinations. Stories of giants are woven into the foundational myths of cultures across the globe, from the Nephilim of the Hebrew Bible to the Titans of Greek mythology and the Jotun of Norse sagas. These are often treated as pure allegory, symbolic tales of a primordial world. But what if these stories are distant, distorted memories of something real? Fringe archaeology has long proposed that giants were not mythological constructs, but an actual race of beings that once walked the earth, a precursor civilization lost to time. The Grand Canyon report fits neatly into a much broader pattern of strange discoveries reported in newspapers throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly in North America. From the mounds of the Ohio Valley to the deserts of the Southwest, local papers frequently carried accounts of farmers or construction crews unearthing skeletons of astounding size, often 7, 8, or even 9 feet tall, sometimes accompanied by crude stone tools or unusual burial artifacts. A famous example comes from 1885, when workmen in Moundsville, West Virginia, were said to have uncovered several skeletons measuring between 7 and 9 feet in a massive burial mound. In 1891, reports from a site in Arizona described the discovery of a giant mummy in a cave, a figure wrapped in a strange fabric. These stories share a common and frustrating fate. They appear in the press with great fanfare, often including witness testimonies and sometimes even crude sketches, and then they vanish, the skeletons themselves are rarely, if ever, seen again. They are said to have been sent to a local historical society or to a museum in a nearby city, or most tellingly, to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. And then the trail ends. No museum today displays these giant skeletons. No academic papers study them. Official institutions, when asked, deny their existence or attribute the reports to misidentified mammoth bones or simple hoaxes. This creates a haunting pattern, a chorus of whispers from the past all saying the same thing, followed by a uniform silence from the present. The Grand Canyon giants are not an isolated rumor. They are perhaps the most dramatic note in a symphony of strange finds that have been systematically removed from public view and scholarly discussion. This pattern suggests something far more significant than a single newspaper hoax. It points to a potential cover-up, a deliberate effort by the gatekeepers of history to filter out any evidence that does not fit the established narrative of human development. If giants were real, their existence would force a complete rewrite of human prehistory, challenging our understanding of evolution, migration, and the very timeline of civilization on this continent. The disappearance of their bones is, for many, the most compelling evidence that the truth is being hidden. The Smithsonian Institution stands as a fortress of American knowledge, its very name synonymous with trust and authority. Founded with a mission for the increase and diffusion of knowledge, it is the caretaker of our national memory, housing over 150 million artifacts. Its official position on the Grand Canyon discovery is absolute and unambiguous. According to the Smithsonian, there is no record of a G.E. Kinkaid or a Professor S.A. Jordan leading any expedition to the Grand Canyon in 1909. Their archives contain no correspondence, no field notes, no photographs, and certainly no Egyptian relics or 9-foot skeletons from such a venture. They classify the Arizona Gazette article as a classic example of a newspaper hoax, a tall tale from an era when sensationalism often trumped fact-checking. This dismissal is clean, logical, and perfectly aligned with mainstream archaeology. It is the answer you would expect from the pinnacle of scientific establishment. But for those who believe the story contains a kernel of truth, this denial is not the end of the discussion. It is the very heart of the conspiracy. The cover-up theory does not accuse the Smithsonian of mere error, but of a deliberate, century-long policy of suppression. Proponents point to a persistent and troubling pattern that extends far beyond the Grand Canyon. For generations, local newspapers from coast to coast reported the discovery of anomalously large skeletal remains. The common thread in these stories is their final destination. The bones were often said to be shipped to the Smithsonian for further study, and then they were never heard from again. Take the case of Cresap Mound in West Virginia, excavated in the late 19th century. Newspapers at the time reported the discovery of several skeletons measuring over 7 feet, with one alleged to be 9 feet 4 inches tall. These were said to be sent to Washington. Today, the Smithsonian has no record of them. Similar stories echo from Wisconsin burial mounds, from Nevada caves, from Arizona deserts, each following the same script: discovery, local publicity, shipment to the National Museum, and then silence. The institutional explanation is that these reports were exaggerations or misidentifications, that the bones of mastodons or other large mammals were mistaken for human giants by overeager amateurs. They argue that if such profound evidence existed, it would be front and center in every museum in the world. Yet the sheer volume of these reports from so many different regions and time periods creates a shadow history, one where the gatekeepers of our past are accused of filtering the evidence to fit a predetermined narrative. Why would they do this? The motive proposed by cover-up theorists is not one of malice but of paradigm protection. The existence of a race of giants or of advanced pre-Columbian civilizations with transoceanic ties would completely destabilize the accepted models of human migration and cultural development in the Americas. It would render decades of academic work obsolete and force a humbling admission that the history books are wrong. From this perspective, the Smithsonian's role transforms from neutral curator to active guardian of a fragile orthodoxy. Their denials are not seen as corrections of a falsehood, but as the necessary maintenance of a wall that keeps inconvenient truths from flooding into the public consciousness. This creates an impossible dilemma for the curious mind. Do you trust the word of the foremost scientific institution, or do you trust the chorus of whispers from the past that it consistently dismisses? This pattern of vanished giants is not confined to the Arizona desert. It is a ghost story written across the entire map of America, recorded in the brittle pages of countless local newspapers from a different era. For decades following the Civil War, as the nation expanded westward and towns were built, the earth repeatedly gave up strange and massive secrets. In the summer of 1883, near the town of Mandan, North Dakota, the Bismarck Tribune reported the excavation of a burial mound containing skeletons of enormous size, some measuring over 8 feet in length, with skulls that were said to be much larger and thicker than those of modern humans. The article noted the presence of Smithsonian researchers at the site. A year later, in 1884, the New York Times itself published a brief but startling dispatch from Sayre, Pennsylvania. Workers digging a foundation had uncovered a burial ground containing skeletons measuring over 7 feet tall. Each skull, the report stated, had strange bony protrusions just above the eyebrows. A professor from the American Investigating Museum was said to have witnessed the discovery, and the bones were reportedly shipped to the Philadelphia Museum. Today, no such skeletons are on display, and the official record is silent. These stories share a chillingly familiar rhythm. First, the accidental discovery, often by farmers or railroad crews. Then, the arrival of an authority figure, sometimes explicitly named as a Smithsonian archaeologist. A brief period of local excitement and newspaper coverage follows. And finally, the physical evidence is removed, catalogued, and sent away to a museum or institution, never to be exhibited or discussed in academic circles again. The sheer volume of these reports is staggering, from the mounds of Ohio and West Virginia to the shores of Florida and the deserts of Nevada. In 1895, the San Francisco Chronicle described the discovery of a giant mummy in a cave near Yosemite, a figure wrapped in a strange, leather-like material. In 1931, the Las Vegas Review-Journal told of prospectors finding a cave containing several 9-foot skeletons clad in animal skins. Each account is a fragment of the same larger mosaic, a mosaic that mainstream history has systematically dismissed as hoax, misidentification, or frontier tall tale. The official explanation is that these were often the bones of mastodons, or that the measurements were exaggerated, or that the newspapermen of the day were simply hungry for a sensational story. But when you read these old articles, the tone is often matter-of-fact, devoid of the wild speculation you might expect from a pure fabrication. They read like local news, reporting a curious event that happened to the townspeople. This creates a profound disconnect. Either a significant portion of the 19th century American press was engaged in a coordinated, pointless campaign of giant-related fiction, or they were documenting a genuine, recurring archaeological phenomenon that was later erased from the official narrative. The theory of suppression suggests a motive rooted not in evil, but in institutional preservation. The dominant paradigm of American archaeology in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was firmly set. It described a sequence of primitive, nomadic peoples slowly evolving into the sophisticated mound-building cultures, all descended from migrations across the Bering Land Bridge. The sudden, widespread appearance of a race of giants, or of any evidence suggesting a vastly different human history on the continent, would have shattered that framework. It would have invalidated careers, embarrassed prestigious institutions, and demanded a humbling rewrite of every textbook. From this perspective, confiscating and sequestering such anomalous evidence was not seen as destruction of truth, but as protection of scientific order. The bones were not stolen, they were quietly filed away as embarrassing outliers, labeled as mistakes, and left to gather dust in the deepest vaults of the Smithsonian's collection, a collection so vast that items can and do become permanently lost. This is the core of the cover-up claim. It is not a single act of theft, but a century-long process of filtering, a deliberate decision about what history is allowed to be. The silence that followed the article's publication is almost as loud as the claims within it. To understand this mystery, we must turn a critical eye to the source itself, the Arizona Gazette article from April 5, 1909. First, we must ask, what kind of newspaper was this? The Arizona Gazette was a legitimate daily paper in Phoenix, not a fringe tabloid. It reported on local politics, business, and community events. This fact gives the story an initial weight. It did not appear in some sensationalist pulp magazine. Yet, the date of publication raises an immediate red flag. April 5th is perilously close to April Fool's Day. In that era, newspapers often participated in the tradition of printing outlandish hoax stories on or around the 1st of April, crafting elaborate tales to fool their readership. Could this have been an exceptionally detailed April Fool's joke that simply ran a few days late? The article's own language provides clues. The tone is remarkably matter-of-fact, devoid of the winking humor or obvious absurdity you might expect from a prank. It reads like a straightforward news report detailing the discovery with specific measurements, descriptions of artifacts, and the names of the explorers. This clinical delivery is what makes it so compelling and so frustrating. It presents a fantasy with the dry authority of a government report. Another theory suggests the story was fabricated as a tourism booster, a wild tale designed to lure adventurous travelers and investors to the still-developing American Southwest. The Grand Canyon was declared a national monument just the year before, in 1908. And promoting its wonders, even fictional ones, would have served a commercial purpose. Yet, if that was the goal, it was pursued with a strange lack of follow-through. The most damning evidence against the article's truth is what is missing. In an age where photography, while not ubiquitous, was certainly available for major expeditions, there is not a single photograph, no snapshots of the cavern entrance, the hieroglyph-covered walls, or the giant skeletons. For a discovery billed as the archaeological find of the century, the ultimate proof was never produced. Furthermore, the Gazette itself never published a follow-up article. There was no Part 2 describing Professor Jordan's ongoing excavations, no list of artifacts recovered, no interviews with other team members. The story exploded onto the front page and then vanished into thin air as if it never happened. A legitimate newspaper, upon realizing it had been the victim of a hoax, would typically publish a retraction to maintain its credibility. The Arizona Gazette never did. This creates a perplexing scenario. We are left with a single, detailed account from a reputable source, published suspiciously close to April Fool's Day, yet written with a straight face and then never officially corrected or expanded upon. The lack of photographs is the ultimate stumbling block. In the early 20th century, seeing was believing, and the absence of a visual record for a claim this monumental is, for most historians, the definitive reason to dismiss it. It allows the story to exist in a permanent state of ambiguity, a ghost in the machine of history, impossible to verify and equally impossible to completely exercise. The Grand Canyon's geology tells a story of its own, one written in sandstone, limestone, and shale. To assess the feasibility of a vast man-made city, we must listen to what the rock itself allows. The canyon's walls are primarily sedimentary rock, layers deposited over hundreds of millions of years. While these rocks can form caves through natural processes like water erosion, they are generally not ideal for carving extensive, stable underground networks on the scale described. Natural caverns in the region, like those found in the Redwall limestone layer, are often intricate but are formed by acidic water dissolving the rock, creating winding, organic passages, not the straight, uniform, engineered tunnels reported in the newspaper. The article's description of a mile-long, smooth corridor descending at a perfect grade, with hundreds of adjoining rooms and a sophisticated ventilation shaft system, would represent a construction project of staggering ambition, even with modern machinery. In the ancient world, it would be an unparalleled engineering feat. Geologists point out that the sedimentary layers of the canyon are prone to fracturing and collapse. Maintaining the structural integrity of such a vast hollowed-out space over centuries without any signs of reinforcement like pillars or arches as described pushes against the limits of what the stone can naturally support. The reported ventilation shafts rising hundreds of feet to the surface present another profound challenge. Precise, narrow vertical shafts drilled through unstable sedimentary rock would be incredibly difficult to engineer and maintain without constant collapse. From a purely geological standpoint, the described citadel sits at the very edge of plausibility, requiring a perfect alignment of rock stability and ancient engineering genius that experts find highly unlikely to exist. Mainstream archaeology's response to the Egyptian connection is even more definitive. There is a complete absence of verifiable evidence. No Egyptian artifacts, no fragments of pottery, no shards of inscribed stone have ever been found in the Grand Canyon or anywhere in the southwestern United States through documented, peer-reviewed excavation. The established timeline is clear. Ancient Egyptian civilization flourished along the Nile from around 3100 BCE, while the known cultures of the American Southwest, like the ancestral Puebloans, developed entirely independently thousands of years later and thousands of miles away. The architectural styles, pottery designs, and tool technologies bear no resemblance. Archaeologists argue that if a seafaring Egyptian colony had established a foothold powerful enough to carve a metropolis into the Grand Canyon, they would have left a cultural footprint far beyond a single hidden cave. We would find their influence in nearby settlements, their distinctive artifacts in trade networks, their agricultural practices in the soil. That evidence simply does not exist. The consensus is that the described hieroglyphs were likely natural mineral stains, weathering patterns, or genuine indigenous petroglyphs misinterpreted by an excited explorer. The copper tools could be misidentified native artifacts, as copper was used by some North American cultures. The central idol resembling Buddha or Thoth might have been a naturally formed rock formation, a trick of the light and shadow in a cavern, seen through the lens of expectation. This leads to the most likely scientific explanation for the entire saga, a cascade of misinterpretation. Imagine an explorer in 1909, perhaps G.E. Kinkaid, if he was real, navigating the immense, overwhelming landscape of the Grand Canyon. He enters a large, impressive natural cavern system, one of the many that do exist. The human mind, especially one steeped in the popular adventure stories of the era, seeks patterns. Stalactites and stalagmites can form shapes that look eerily like statues. Mineral deposits on walls can create lines and swirls that resemble writing. A particularly large, elongated natural rock formation in a dark chamber could be mistaken for a giant skeleton. The dry, cool air of a deep cave can mummify remains, and the skeletons of large animals like bighorn sheep or even prehistoric megafauna could be misidentified. Once the idea of a lost city takes root, every shadow and contour reinforces the belief. The story, once told to a newspaper reporter hungry for a sensational scoop, would be polished and amplified, the ambiguities sharpened into certainties. From this perspective, the Arizona Gazette article is not a report of a discovery, but a record of a powerful illusion, one born from the awe-inspiring grandeur of the canyon itself and the timeless human desire to find lost worlds hidden in the Earth's deepest places. The silence that followed was not a cover-up, but the natural result of a story that could not survive the first breath of sober scrutiny. Yet, for those who feel the official explanations are too tidy, this dismissal only deepens the mystery. If it was all a simple mistake, why does the story feel so complete, and why does its echo linger for over a century? The description of that cross-legged idol opens a door to an entirely different ocean of mystery. While the newspaper framed it through an Egyptian lens, the immediate visual for any reader in 1909 would have been a statue of Buddha. This single detail shifts the speculative geography from the sands of Egypt to the temples of Asia, suggesting a potential trans-Pacific connection that is, in its own way, just as revolutionary. The idea that Buddhist missionaries or travelers could have reached the Americas long before European contact is a persistent thread in alternative history. Proponents point to stylistic similarities in art, shared symbolism like the serpent or the lotus, and vague references in some Asian historical texts to distant lands across the Eastern Sea. The Grand Canyon idol, if real, would be the most dramatic physical evidence for such a voyage, a sacred image carved in the deepest heart of the continent. This theory connects to a much older and broader tradition of diffusionist thinking, the belief that key elements of civilization were spread across the globe by a single, advanced source or by multiple forgotten voyages. In the 19th century, a popular theory held that the mysterious mound builders of North America were actually the lost tribes of Israel, a biblical people exiled and forgotten, who somehow crossed the Atlantic and built their cities in the New World. This idea, though thoroughly debunked by modern archaeology, captured the public imagination because it offered a familiar, biblical explanation for the unfamiliar earthworks dotting the American landscape. The Buddha statue report fits neatly into this pattern of seeking Old World explanations for New World wonders. It reflects a deep-seated reluctance, common even among scholars of that era, to grant ancient American cultures full independence in their achievements. The notion that a sophisticated underground city must have been built by Egyptians or Buddhists implicitly diminishes the capabilities of indigenous peoples. Today, we understand that the ancestral Pueblones and other southwestern cultures were brilliant engineers in their own right, carving entire cities into cliffs like Mesa Verde without any need for transoceanic tutors. Yet, the allure of a lost global connection remains powerful. It speaks to a romantic vision of a shrunken ancient world, where intrepid monks or priests sailed impossible distances and left their mark in the most unexpected places. The Buddha detail, therefore, does more than add another candidate for the canyon's builders. It reveals the story's role as a mirror. It reflects our own cultural biases and our enduring fascination with the idea that all ancient mysteries are ultimately linked, that a single thread, whether Egyptian, Buddhist, or Israelite, can explain the tangled tapestry of the human past. This layer makes the Grand Canyon tale not just an archaeological mystery, but a psychological one, showing how easily we project the familiar onto the profoundly unknown. Among the most tangible clues left by this vanished civilization were their tools. The newspaper described copper vessels and implements of a remarkable hardness, a detail that seems small but opens a significant technological mystery. Copper in its pure form is a relatively soft metal. It can be hammered into shape, but it bends and dulls easily, making it poor for durable tools or weapons. The report's emphasis on hardened copper suggests something beyond simple native metal use. It implies an alloy or a sophisticated work-hardening technique. This immediately raises a question. Does this description fit within the known metallurgical history of ancient North America, or does it point to knowledge from across the sea? To find an answer, we must journey far from the Arizona desert to the cold, forested shores of the Great Lakes. Here, a culture archaeologists call the Old Copper Complex flourished for thousands of years, beginning as early as 7,500 years ago. These ancient Native Americans were not just using copper, they were the first metal workers on the continent. They mined pure copper from glacial deposits around Lake Superior, painstakingly heating and hammering it into spear points, knives, hooks, and ornaments. Their work is a testament to incredible skill and patience, but it adheres to a specific technological path. The old copper complex primarily used cold hammering and annealing, a process of heating and cooling to make the metal less brittle. They did not, as far as the evidence shows, create true bronze by alloying copper with tin or arsenic, which is what creates a genuinely hard, durable metal like that described in the Grand Canyon article. Their tools were functional and beautiful, but they remained within the limits of working a pure, natural metal. Now compare this to the ancient Old World. In Egypt and Mesopotamia by 3000 BCE, metallurgists had mastered the creation of bronze, a hard alloy that revolutionized toolmaking and warfare. They understood complex smelting, casting, and alloying techniques far beyond simple hammering. So when the Arizona Gazette speaks of hardened copper tools in an underground city, it is subtly suggesting a level of metallurgical science that aligns more closely with ancient Egypt than with the known practices of the Great Lakes copper workers. This creates a puzzling disconnect. If a group with advanced bronze-making knowledge had settled in the Grand Canyon, where would they source their tin or arsenic to create the alloy? No such mining sites are known in the region. Could they have brought finished tools with them on a long voyage, or did they possess a different, lost method for hardening pure copper? The technological gap is a quiet but powerful piece of the puzzle. It either represents a spectacular, isolated advancement by a completely unknown southwestern culture, one that left no other trace, or it is a fingerprint, a small, telling sign that the makers of those tools brought their knowledge from a place where such technology was already ancient. This layer of the mystery is not about giant bones or strange idols, but about practical, everyday craft, the kind of evidence that speaks silently of a people's origins in the very things they held in their hands. The dark, sealed crypts described in that article hold a clue that is both biological and cultural. The report mentions mummified remains with a dark brown, almost black coloration, preserved not by elaborate embalming but by the environment itself. This detail is perhaps the most scientifically plausible part of the entire story. The Grand Canyon's climate is a perfect natural mummification chamber. The air is extremely dry with low humidity that sucks moisture from organic tissue. Deep within a cavern, shielded from rain and wind, the temperature remains remarkably constant, neither freezing nor baking the remains. In such a sterile, arid tomb, a body would desiccate slowly. Skin and muscle would shrink and harden, pulling tight against the bone, taking on that leathery, dark brown hue described in the newspaper. This natural process has preserved countless remains across the American Southwest, from the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde to remote desert caves. So the existence of mummies in the canyon is not by itself extraordinary. The true mystery lies in their context and their treatment. How were these bodies prepared and where were they placed? Egyptian mummification was an intentional, ritualistic art. It involved removing internal organs, treating the body with natron salt, and wrapping it in linen, all to ensure the soul's passage to the afterlife. The bodies were then sealed in decorated sarcophagi within grand tombs. The Grand Canyon report describes something far simpler: bodies left inside chambers, seemingly preserved by accident of location rather than by complex ceremony. This starkly contrasts with known burial practices of the ancestral Puebloan people, often called the Anasazi. These indigenous inhabitants of the region typically buried their dead in simple graves, often in refuse piles or in abandoned rooms within their cliff dwellings. They did not practice intentional mummification, though the dry climate naturally mummified many of their dead. Their burials were accompanied by everyday items like pottery, tools, or baskets, offerings for the journey. The crypts in the newspaper story sound different. They are described as dedicated side chambers, a series of rooms set apart specifically for the dead, suggesting a more formal architectural approach to burial. This arrangement feels more organized, more permanent than the typical ancestral Puebloan practice. So we are left with three possibilities. First, the explorers simply stumbled upon a previously unknown ancestral Puebloan burial cave. The dry air had done its work, creating naturally mummified remains, and the explorers, expecting a lost civilization, misinterpreted what they saw. The crypts could have been natural recesses in a cave wall. Second, the remains belonged to a different, later indigenous group with different practices, one that used caves more formally for interment. Or third, the report was accurate, and it documents a funerary culture entirely distinct from any known in the region, one that carved out dedicated vaults for its dead, which would align more with old-world sensibilities than with new-world traditions. The condition of the bodies tells us the canyon could preserve them. The arrangement of the bodies, as described, whispers that perhaps their culture was not from here. The story did not end with a newspaper's silence. For over a century, the coordinates to that lost cavern have remained the ultimate treasure map, drawing the curious and the determined into the canyon's depths. Modern expeditions, armed not with pickaxes but with GPS units and satellite imagery, have taken up the search where the Smithsonian left off. These are not professional archaeologists but independent researchers, history buffs, and adventure utterers, all lured by the same tantalizing question: what if it is still out there waiting to be found? Their quest is fueled by that single, detailed article, a document they treat as a cryptic field guide. They scour the descriptions, trying to match the reported details: 2,000 feet above the river, a mile-long tunnel, a central chamber shaped like a cross, to the real and overwhelming topography of the Grand Canyon. Specific areas have emerged as focal points for these searches. One frequently cited location is the region around the confluence of the Colorado and Little Colorado rivers, a place of immense geological complexity and deep cultural significance to native tribes. Another is the area near what is called the 49-Mile Canyon, a side gorge where some claim the rock formations align with the newspaper's clues. These modern explorers hike treacherous, unmarked trails, scan cliff faces for unnatural openings, and sometimes even employ drones to peer into inaccessible ledges, all in the hope of spotting the telltale stain or the geometric shadow that betrays a man-made entrance. The challenges they face are monumental, and they highlight exactly why such a discovery could remain hidden. The Grand Canyon is not a single trench, it is a labyrinth. It sprawls across over 1 million acres, a wilderness of countless side canyons, sheer cliffs, and crumbling rock faces. What looks like a promising cave from a distance might be a shallow alcove, or it might require a dangerous technical climb to reach, only to reveal a dead end. The terrain itself is a guardian, punishing and indifferent. Summer temperatures soar well above 100 degrees, dehydration is a constant threat, and sudden flash floods can turn a dry wash into a deadly torrent in minutes. Beyond the natural dangers, there is the sheer scale of the search. Finding one specific cave entrance in that immensity is like looking for a single, lost book in a library the size of a city, without knowing which floor or section it is on. Many who go looking return with stories of narrow escapes, exhausting climbs, and tantalizing but inconclusive finds. A strange rock formation here, a section of wall that looks curiously smooth there. They document their journeys in online forums and video series, building a modern mythology around the hunt itself. Yet, despite decades of looking, no one has presented verifiable, undeniable proof of the cavern system described in 1909. This persistent absence of evidence, even after so much searching, feeds back into the central mystery. It suggests one of three things: either the location was misreported or misunderstood, making the modern searches futile, or the entrance has collapsed or been sealed by natural forces over the last century, hiding it forever, or, as the skeptics maintain, there was never anything to find in the first place. The modern searchers, in their very failure, add a new chapter to the legend, proving that some mysteries are so compelling they can draw generations back to the same impossible cliff face, forever wondering what lies just behind the stone. The search for the cavern is not just a battle against nature, it is also a confrontation with invisible lines on a map. The Grand Canyon is a complex mosaic of jurisdictions, and some of the most intriguing areas are entirely off-limits. This reality fuels a compelling layer of the cover-up theory, the idea that the truth is not lost but locked away behind official restrictions. A significant portion of the land surrounding the Grand Canyon is sovereign territory of the Navajo Nation. For the Navajo people, these landscapes are not just physical places but sacred, living entities woven into their creation stories and cultural identity. The idea of outsiders digging through these lands in search of a mythical city is not only disrespectful, it is often illegal without explicit permission from the tribal government. The Navajo Nation rightly protects its heritage and its land from exploitation, and this stewardship creates a legitimate ethical barrier to any casual exploration. But the restrictions extend beyond tribal land. The American Southwest has long been a region of intense government and military interest. During the Cold War, vast swaths of desert were used for weapons testing, missile ranges, and secret installations. The airspace above the Grand Canyon is a carefully managed corridor for military flights. Could a genuine archaeological site of unimaginable importance have been discovered, only to be quietly classified under the blanket of national security? It is a tantalizing speculation. If a cavern system contained not just artifacts, but perhaps advanced ancient technology or materials with strategic value, the motivation to seal it away from both public and academic view would be immense. The rationale would not necessarily be malicious but pragmatic from a certain perspective. Control the site, control the narrative, and prevent any potentially destabilizing knowledge from leaking out. This leads to the most profound motive of all, the protection of a paradigm. Imagine for a moment that the discovery was real. Validating a lost Egyptian or transoceanic colony in the heart of America would do more than rewrite history textbooks. It would send shockwaves through our cultural and even religious foundations. It would challenge the historical narratives of Native American tribes, not by denying their deep ancestry, but by inserting an unknown chapter that precedes them. It could be seen as undermining their claims of being the first peoples, even if that was not the intent. For a government institution, unveiling such a truth would be a political and social earthquake, inviting conflict, controversy, and a fundamental crisis of identity for the nation itself. From this viewpoint, sealing a cave becomes an act of preservation, not of history, but of the established social order. It is the ultimate cold storage for a truth deemed too dangerous, too inconvenient to ever see the light of day. So the restricted areas serve a dual purpose in the legend. They are both a practical explanation for why no one can find the cave, and a symbolic representation of the walls we build around ideas that threaten to change everything we think we know. The Grand Canyon's hidden city is not a lonely anomaly in the wilderness of history. It is part of a scattered, global archipelago of strange sites, each one an island of mystery in a sea of official skepticism. From the forests of Europe to the coasts of Australia, similar discoveries whisper the same unsettling suggestion that our timeline is wrong. Consider the rolling hills of Visoko, Bosnia. Here, a researcher named Sam Osmanagic claims that several large, grass-covered mounds are not hills at all, but the oldest and largest pyramids on Earth, built by a lost civilization over 12,000 years ago. Mainstream geologists and archaeologists have universally rejected this, stating the formations are natural, if unusually symmetrical, geological features. They point to the lack of construction blocks, proper excavation layers, or artifacts proving human construction. Yet, Osmanagic and his team continue to dig, finding what they say are man-made concrete blocks and mysterious underground tunnels. The conflict is a perfect mirror of the Grand Canyon debate, a passionate outsider challenging institutional expertise with a radical reinterpretation of the landscape itself. Then travel to the rugged bushland north of Sydney, Australia. Here you will find the Gosford glyphs, a set of nearly 300 Egyptian-style hieroglyphs carved into two large sandstone walls. They depict names of Egyptian gods, symbols of royalty, and even what appear to be accounts of a tragic sea voyage. Egyptologists dismiss them as a modern hoax, citing grammatical errors, anachronistic symbols, and the fact that no other Egyptian artifacts have been found on the continent. Local Aboriginal elders, however, speak of the carvings being there long before European settlement. The site is a cultural collision, a piece of the Nile seemingly dropped into the Australian outback, forcing the same question as the Grand Canyon hieroglyphs. Are they proof of impossible travel or an elaborate, misguided forgery? Closer to home, in a small museum in Tennessee, rests the Bat Creek Stone. Discovered in a burial mound in the late 19th century, this small stone tablet is inscribed with characters that, in the 1970s, a prominent epigrapher identified as Paleo-Hebrew, specifically spelling out for Judea. If authentic, it would suggest that Hebrew or Phoenician explorers reached the American interior centuries before Columbus. The Smithsonian, which originally excavated it, catalogued it as a curiosity, and mainstream archaeology largely considers it a probable fraud, perhaps a stone inscribed by a Confederate soldier familiar with Masonic symbols. Yet, like the giant skeleton reports, its story follows a familiar arc: discovery, a shocking interpretation, institutional dismissal, and then a lingering doubt that refuses to die. These sites and dozens like them form the canon of what is often called forbidden archaeology. They are united not by a single answer but by a shared fate: rejection. In each case, the official institutions, the Smithsonians and the academic departments, employ a standard set of tools to dismantle the claims. They cite a lack of peer-reviewed evidence, the possibility of hoax, the likelihood of misinterpretation, or the principle of Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation, usually a natural formation or a modern fabrication, is probably the correct one. This creates a powerful dynamic, a wall of established science on one side, and on the other, a growing community of independent researchers, amateur historians, and curious citizens who see not a series of hoaxes but a pattern of suppression. They argue that the institutions are not neutral arbiters, but gatekeepers with a vested interest in maintaining the current historical paradigm. To them, the Grand Canyon story is not an isolated tall tale. It is a key piece in a global puzzle, one that suggests our ancestors were more connected, more adventurous, and perhaps more advanced than the textbooks will ever admit. This community thrives in the spaces official science leaves blank, building entire frameworks of alternative history where seafaring Egyptians, lost Atlanteans, and ancient giants coexist. The emotional core of this movement is not really about specific artifacts. It is about the right to question, the suspicion that history, as it is written, is incomplete. When you look at the Gosford glyphs or the Bosnian pyramids, you are not just looking at strange rocks, you are looking at a rebellion against the official story of humankind. And right at the heart of that rebellion, deep in its most iconic landscape, sits the enduring enigma of a city carved beneath the Arizona stone. The enduring power of this story lies not in its evidence but in its emotional architecture. It is a narrative perfectly engineered to resonate with something deep within the human psyche. At its core, the Grand Canyon mystery functions as a compelling conspiracy theory, and our attraction to such tales is far more complex than a simple desire for the truth. These stories fulfill a fundamental need to make sense of a chaotic world by identifying a hidden order, a pattern of intentional control, even if that control is malevolent. When faced with the immense, confusing span of history, the idea that a cabal of experts is hiding the truth is paradoxically comforting. It replaces random chance and incomplete data with a story of deliberate action, of villains and secrets. It transforms the frustrating gaps in our knowledge from voids into locked rooms, suggesting that answers do exist if only we could break down the door. This taps directly into a profound and growing cultural distrust of large institutions. In an age where governments, corporations, and even scientific bodies have been caught in lies, exaggerations, or failures, the idea that the Smithsonian would cover up a world-changing discovery does not feel like a wild leap. It feels like a logical extension of the skepticism we apply to every other powerful entity. The institution becomes the perfect villain, a monolithic gatekeeper of knowledge more interested in protecting its own authority than in pursuing truth. This narrative empowers the individual viewer, casting them in the role of the intrepid truth seeker challenging the faceless establishment. It is a classic David versus Goliath story, where you, armed with curiosity and an old newspaper article, can see what the PhDs in their ivory towers refuse to acknowledge. Beyond the thrill of the conspiracy, there is a deep, romantic longing for lost worlds. The notion of a hidden city, a forgotten chapter of human achievement, speaks to a universal sense that our past is grander and more mysterious than the sterile timeline presented in textbooks. We are drawn to the idea of a golden age of advanced ancient cultures whose wisdom was lost to time. The Grand Canyon as a setting is the ultimate amplifier for this romance. It is not a mundane field or a crowded city block. It is a sublime natural cathedral, a place of awe that already feels outside of ordinary time. Its sheer scale and ancient geology naturally suggest the possibility of deep secrets. To imagine an Egyptian citadel or a Buddhist temple hidden within those layers is to project the ultimate human mystery onto the ultimate natural wonder. The landscape itself seems to demand an epic story. This combination is irresistible, a conspiracy that flatters our intelligence, a mystery set in the most majestic place imaginable, and a romance that promises a past far more exciting than the one we are told we have. It offers not just an alternative fact, but an alternative feeling, one of wonder, rebellion, and the tantalizing possibility that the greatest adventure story is still buried, waiting for us just beneath the surface of the known world. Skeptics have not simply dismissed this story, they have dissected it with the precision of a surgeon. The most compelling debunking does not come from a blanket denial, but from tracing the tale back to its likely literary roots. Historians of the strange, like David Childress, have meticulously followed the story's paper trail and found it leads not to an Arizona cave, but to the popular bookshelves of the early 20th century. This was the golden age of pulp adventure fiction, when stories of lost worlds and ancient races captivated the public imagination. No author epitomized this genre more than H. Rider Haggard. His novels like She and King Solomon's Mines were international bestsellers, featuring intrepid explorers discovering forgotten civilizations hidden in remote corners of the earth, complete with treasure, strange deities, and often mysterious ruins. The parallels to the Arizona Gazette article are striking and impossible to ignore. An explorer on a river journey, a hidden cavern entrance high on a cliff face, an underground city with a central idol, a race of giants, and a connection to Egypt. These are not the dry details of an archaeological report. They are the essential building blocks of a Haggard-style adventure yarn. Investigators point out that the article appeared in 1909, a time when Haggard's influence was at its peak. It reads less like journalism and more like a treatment for a novel, hitting every expected beat of the genre. The theory posits that a creative newspaper editor needing to fill space, perhaps inspired by the recent designation of the Grand Canyon as a national monument, simply crafted a local version of these fantastical stories. He transplanted the lost world from the heart of Africa to the heart of Arizona, using the canyon's own majestic scale as a ready-made setting. This explanation elegantly solves many of the story's greatest puzzles. It accounts for the complete lack of photographs or follow-up because there was no physical site to document. It explains why the explorers Kinkaid and Jordan vanish from history because they were characters, not real people. It clarifies why the Smithsonian has no record because no expedition ever took place. The article was not a cover-up but a creative writing exercise, a piece of regional myth-making that took on a life of its own. This literary origin theory is the Occam's razor of the mystery, the simplest explanation that requires the fewest assumptions. It suggests we have been analyzing a work of fiction as if it were a historical document, searching for truth in a story that was never intended to be anything more than thrilling entertainment. The real lost world, in this view, was not beneath the canyon, but on the printed pages of the novels that fired the imaginations of an entire generation, an imagination that then spilled over into the newsprint of a Phoenix daily. Yet, even this clean, logical rebuttal cannot fully extinguish the embers of doubt. If it was just a hoax, why does it feel so meticulously detailed? And why, over a century later, does the image of that hidden cross-legged idol in the dark still feel so hauntingly specific? But who was G.E. Kinkaid? The name is the first thread we must pull in this tapestry of rumor. For over a century, he has existed only as a signature on a story, a ghost in the canyon's haze. Attempts to find him in the historical record have been an exercise in frustration. No official Smithsonian employment logs list a G.E. Kinkaid. No known archaeological journals from the period cite his work. He seems to vanish the moment the newspaper is put down. Yet, persistent digging by amateur historians has uncovered faint traces that suggest a man by that name did exist in the region, though his life bears little resemblance to the intrepid explorer of legend. Census records and old Arizona directories point to a G.E. Kinkaid who worked as a ferry operator on the Colorado River in the early 1900s. This was not a glamorous occupation but a vital and difficult one, running a flatboat to transport people, livestock, and supplies across the treacherous river. Such a man would have possessed an intimate, practical knowledge of the river's currents, its moods, and its canyon walls. He would have heard every tale prospectors and travelers brought with them, stories of lost mines, strange sights, and ancient ruins. This portrait paints Kinkaid not as a credentialed archaeologist, but as a local riverman, a figure woven into the fabric of frontier life. He was a prospector by necessity, like so many others, scratching a living from the harsh land. This context reframes the entire story. If this ferryman Kinkaid is our source, then the tale transforms from an official expedition report into a campfire story told by a river guide, a narrative shaped by years of listening to the whispers of the canyon and the grandiose adventure novels of the day. He becomes a potential author of the mystery, not its scientific discoverer. Another theory takes this a step further, suggesting the name itself is a playful clue, a pun lost to time. In the slang of the era, a Kinkaid or Kinkaid could refer to a clever story, a tall tale, or a humorous deception. If true, then the byline on the article was a wink to the reader, a signal that what followed was a yarn, a piece of local folklore dressed up as breaking news. This would explain the clinical detail. The story is told with a straight face precisely because the best tall tales are. The teller maintains absolute seriousness to sell the illusion. Whether he was a real ferryman who spun a fantastic account or a fictional name hinting at the story's nature, the figure of G.E. Kinkaid dissolves upon close inspection. He retreats from a Smithsonian explorer into the mist of southwestern storytelling, an archetype of the grizzled prospector who knows where the gold is buried but whose directions are always just a little bit fuzzy. This murkiness is the story's greatest protection and its deepest flaw. Without a solid historical person to anchor it, the entire account floats in the realm of legend, impossible to verify because its sole witness is himself a mystery. The story refused to stay buried in that single yellowed page. From a local Arizona curiosity, it embarked on a long, strange journey into the bloodstream of modern mythology, mutating and growing with each new medium it touched. Its first major leap was into the world of paperback books, the kind you would find in the back of an occult shop or a roadside bookstore. Authors like Frank Joseph and W. H. Muller, in volumes such as the Suppressed Archives series, reprinted the original article and wove it into a broader tapestry of forbidden history. These books acted as amplifiers, giving the tale a permanent home beyond the fragile newspaper. They presented it not as a hoax but as a suppressed truth, a documented case study in a larger pattern of institutional cover-up. This framing was crucial. It transformed the story from an isolated incident into evidence, a data point in a grand, hidden narrative about humanity's lost past. The tone in these books was one of righteous revelation, speaking directly to readers who suspected the official story was incomplete. This printed resurrection laid the groundwork for everything that followed, creating a community of believers who shared these texts like sacred scriptures. The next and perhaps most powerful stage of the story's evolution arrived with television, specifically with the rise of the History Channel's Ancient Aliens. The show's signature format, with its dramatic reenactments and talking heads proposing extraterrestrial theories, was a perfect vehicle for the Grand Canyon mystery. On screen, the story gained a visual language. Viewers could now see a dramatization of G.E. Kinkaid poling his boat along the Colorado, could watch actors discover the cavern entrance, could glimpse the eerie, cross-legged idol in the shadows. This sensory immersion made the tale feel more real, more immediate than any book ever could. The Ancient Aliens treatment also added a significant new layer, the extraterrestrial angle. While the newspaper and books focused on earthly civilizations like Egypt, the show's narrators posed a tantalizing question. Could this underground city have been built not by human Egyptians, but by ancient astronauts who influenced cultures across the globe? This twist expanded the mystery's scope exponentially, connecting it to a universe of other ancient sites and aligning it with the show's core premise. Television gave the story a mass audience, introducing millions to the idea of a hidden city in the canyon, and in doing so, cemented its place in popular culture as a premier unsolved enigma. But the story's true explosion into legend occurred with the dawn of the internet. Online forums, from the early message boards of the 1990s to the massive subreddits of today, became digital campfires where the tale could be endlessly dissected, debated, and embellished. Here, anyone could be a researcher. Users would post satellite images of the canyon, circling strange shadows they believed were the ventilation shafts. Others would share their own expedition accounts, adding fresh details and near misses to the lore. The story fragmented into countless variations, a living folklore adapting in real time. YouTube became the new television, with hundreds of documentary-style channels producing hours of content analyzing the newspaper article, exploring the geology, and interviewing alternative researchers. This digital ecosystem did something remarkable. It democratized the mystery. No longer was the narrative controlled by a newspaper editor, a book author, or a TV producer. It became a collaborative project, a crowd-sourced legend where every viewer could also be a contributor, a theorist, or a searcher. The core components, the Egyptian artifacts, the giant bones, the Smithsonian denial, remained, but around them grew a lush forest of speculation about Tibetan connections, Atlantean engineers, or even interdimensional portals. The internet ensured the story would never again be forgotten because it gave it a perpetual, ever-evolving life. Each retelling, whether in a book, on a TV screen, or in a YouTube video, acts like a layer of lacquer on an old painting. It adds shine and depth, but it also subtly changes the colors beneath, blurring the line between the original report and the magnificent myth it has become. We are no longer just examining a century-old news item. We are participating in the life of a modern folktale, one that says more about our timeless desire for hidden truths than it may ever say about what truly lies beneath the stone. The sheer volume of the Smithsonian's collection is almost impossible to comprehend. It holds over 150 million objects, a number so vast it becomes abstract. This immense scale is the institution's first and most powerful defense against accusations of a deliberate cover-up. Could they simply have lost the Grand Canyon artifacts? To answer that, we must look at the documented, mundane reality of how large museums operate. Items do go missing. They are mislabeled, misfiled, or placed in the wrong storage box. A famous example is the case of the Eternal Idol, a small, beautiful sculpture by August Rodin. It was donated to the Smithsonian's American Art Museum in the 1920s, meticulously catalogued, and then somehow vanished from the records and memory for decades, only to be rediscovered by a curious intern in a storage room in the 1990s. It was there all along, but the institutional memory had failed. These are the honest accidents of bureaucracy, the inevitable friction in a system tasked with caring for a nation's material memory. A single statue, a box of pottery shards, even a set of unusual bones could plausibly slip through the cracks, misplaced in the labyrinth of warehouses and forgotten. But the Grand Canyon claim is not about a single misplaced crate. It alleges the disappearance of an entire discovery, a complete collection that would constitute one of the most significant archaeological hauls in human history. We are asked to believe that not one, but hundreds of artifacts, from giant skeletons and copper tools to inscribed tablets and a central idol, along with all field notes, photographs, and correspondence from the expedition, simply vanished. This would not be a clerical error, it would be a systemic blackout. Every artifact has a chain of custody, a paper trail from the field to the catalogue. For an entire cavern's worth of material to disappear, that trail would have to be severed at every single link, from the packers in Arizona to the registrars in Washington. The logistical challenge of losing something that big on purpose is staggering. It would require a coordinated silence across multiple departments, a conspiracy not of a few shadowy leaders, but of dozens, perhaps hundreds, of curators, archivists, and scientists over generations, all agreeing to never speak of or document the greatest find of their careers. This stretches the idea of a cover-up into the realm of operational fantasy for many skeptics. They argue it is far more likely that the artifacts never arrived because the expedition never happened. Yet, for those who believe, this very impossibility is the point. They propose that the loss was not an accident of chaos, but a deliberate act of order. The artifacts were not misplaced, they were sequestered, given a secret catalog number, placed in a restricted vault, and erased from the public inventory. In this view, the Smithsonian's vastness is not a defense, but the perfect hiding place, a forest so dense you can make a tree disappear forever. The question then becomes one of motive versus mechanics. Does the institution have a reason to hide a truth this profound? Perhaps. Could it logistically execute that hiding, given its own sprawling, leaky nature? That is a mystery buried within the museum's own endless corridors. Perhaps the truth is not a hidden Egyptian city, but a familiar story seen through a distorted lens. The early 20th century was a time of profound archaeological excitement, dominated by discoveries in the Valley of the Kings. Tutankhamun's tomb would be unearthed just over a decade later, and the public imagination was saturated with images of pyramids, mummies, and hieroglyphs. When an explorer, whether G.E. Kinkaid or another, ventured into the Grand Canyon, they carried this cultural baggage with them. They were primed to see Egypt in the shadows. Now consider what actually exists in that landscape. The ancestral Puebloan people, often called the Anasazi, were master architects of stone. their achievements are not hidden but celebrated in places like Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. They built entire multi-story cities into sheer cliff faces, carving rooms from alcoves and constructing intricate masonry walls. Their structures included circular ceremonial rooms called kivas, storage granaries, and sophisticated water catchment systems. They created pottery, woven textiles, and a cosmology deeply tied to the land. What if our explorers stumbled upon a previously unknown, exceptionally large cliff-dwelling complex, one perhaps sealed in a deep cavern for centuries? The dry air could have preserved organic remains, creating natural mummies with that dark, leathery appearance. The walls might have been covered not in Egyptian hieroglyphs, but in vibrant pictographs or petroglyphs, symbolic rock art that an untrained eye, yearning for mystery, could easily misinterpret. A central, naturally formed stalagmite or a carved ceremonial figure might, in the flickering lamplight, resemble a cross-legged idol. As for the giants, the ancestral pueblones were not unusually tall, but the discovery of several remains in one place could have led to exaggerated measurements, a common problem in early sensational reports. The copper tools might have been finely crafted ceremonial objects or trade items from distant cultures, their significance misunderstood. The ventilation shafts described could align with the sophisticated airflow management some cliff dwellings exhibit, designed to regulate temperature and moisture. In this middle ground theory, the explorers did make a genuine and significant discovery, but not of a lost transoceanic colony. They found a monumental testament to Native American engineering, one of the great cliff-dwelling sites, perhaps the greatest, lost to time. Yet, in their reporting, they filtered every detail through a worldview that could not conceive of such sophistication originating in the Americas. It had to be Egyptian, it had to be Old World, because that was the only frame of reference that made sense to them and their audience. The newspaper article then becomes a tragic palimpsest. The real story, a stunning Native American achievement, was erased and written over with a more exotic, more commercially thrilling narrative. This explanation does not require a Smithsonian Cover Up or ancient sea voyages, only human nature, a tendency to see what we expect to see, and a cultural bias that has often overlooked the profound accomplishments of indigenous peoples. It turns the mystery inside out, suggesting the real secret of the Grand Canyon was not hidden by institutions, but by our own inability a century ago to recognize the genius that was already here. That impulse to see Egypt in a canyon wall reveals something fundamental about how we relate to the past. Whether the cavern was real or not, the story it spawned has taken on a life of its own, evolving into a powerful modern myth. And myths, we must remember, are not concerned with factual accuracy. They are concerned with deeper truths, the kind that speak to our fears, our hopes, and our place in the universe. This Grand Canyon tale functions as a perfect myth for our time, weaving together timeless themes that resonate in an age of information and skepticism. At its heart is the classic archetype of the forbidden discovery, the idea that transformative knowledge exists but is being kept from the public by powerful gatekeepers. This is not a new story. Think of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods or the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. We are instinctively drawn to narratives about hidden truths and the rebels who seek to uncover them. The Smithsonian, in this framework, becomes the modern equivalent of those jealous gods or the guarding angel, the institution that says this knowledge is not for you. It transforms a dry academic debate into an epic struggle, casting each of us as potential Promethean figures, daring to question the official narrative. This myth also taps into our romantic longing for a world that still holds genuine mystery. In an era where satellites have mapped every inch of the globe and the internet offers instant answers, the idea that something as monumental as an Egyptian city could remain hidden is profoundly appealing. It suggests that the age of discovery is not over, that there are still blank spaces on the map, not of geography but of history. The Grand Canyon as a setting is the perfect vessel for this feeling, its vast, inaccessible depth symbolizing the unknown recesses of time itself. The story promises that wonder is not just a memory of the past, but a possibility waiting in the next side canyon. Furthermore, the myth gives voice to a widespread, often inarticulate, sense that the history we are taught is incomplete. It formalizes the nagging suspicion that the clean, linear timelines in textbooks are too neat, too sanitized, missing the messy, strange, and spectacular complexities of the human journey. The giant skeletons and Egyptian hieroglyphs are symbols for all the anomalies that get brushed aside, for every local legend dismissed as folklore, for every artifact that does not fit the established model. The story validates the feeling that the past was wilder, weirder, and more interconnected than we have been led to believe. It tells us our intuition that there is more to the story might just be correct. Ultimately, whether you believe in a literal lost city or not, the endurance of this legend is a message in a bottle from our collective psyche. It tells us we crave a sense of awe, we distrust unquestioned authority, and we desperately want to believe that the world still has secrets grand enough to rewrite everything we think we know. The real treasure hidden in the Grand Canyon may not be a golden idol or a giant's bones, but this enduring human need for a mystery that is larger than life itself. The story leaves behind more questions than answers, a ghostly outline that refuses to be filled in. First and foremost, where is the precise location? The article gives coordinates so vague they are practically a riddle, 2,000 feet above the river near a landmark called the 49-mile canyon. This describes not a point but a swath of terrain encompassing sheer cliffs, crumbling slopes, and hidden side gorges across hundreds of square miles. Is the entrance now buried under a century of rock slides, or was it always a fiction, a set of directions leading nowhere? The absence of a single photograph haunts every theory. If it was a genuine expedition, even in 1909, a camera would have been essential equipment for documentation. Its lack suggests either a cover-up so thorough it confiscated all visual proof, or a story born purely from words with nothing physical ever to capture. What truly became of G.E. Kinkaid and Professor S.A. Jordan? If they were real men, they carried the greatest secret of their lives to their graves without a whisper, leaving no diaries, no letters to family, no claims to fame. If they were fabrications, why were these specific names chosen, and why has no one convincingly unmasked the hoaxer behind them? Most perplexing of all, why has the canyon itself never given up a definitive clue? This is a landscape continuously explored by hikers, geologists, and park rangers for over a century. If the cavern system exists, why has no hiker stumbled upon a strange artifact washed down a gully? No drone survey revealed an unnatural geometric shadow on a remote cliff face. Conversely, if it was a hoax, why has no one found the obvious debunking site, the shallow cave that clearly inspired the tall tale? The silence from the stone is profound. These lingering mysteries form an open invitation, not to a conclusion but to a choice. They ask you to look at the same set of shadows and decide what you see. Is the enduring power of this story a testament to a hidden truth, or to the even deeper human need for a mystery that can never be fully solved? The story presents us with a breathtaking vision, an Egyptian city hidden beneath the American desert, guarded by the bones of giants and sealed away by the very institution meant to preserve our past. It is a narrative of impossible connections and profound suppression, a direct challenge to everything we think we know about the ancient world. Yet, when we turn from the page to the physical world, the evidence evaporates. No museum displays these relics, no photographs document the cavern, and the official record is a wall of silence and denial. Mainstream archaeology dismisses it all as a perfect storm of hoax, misinterpretation, and frontier tall tale, a conclusion grounded in logic and the stark absence of proof. So why does this tale refuse to die? Perhaps its true power lies not in what it reveals about the past, but in what it ignites within us. It fuels our imagination, giving form to the nagging suspicion that history is richer, stranger, and more interconnected than any textbook dares to admit. It transforms a national park into a landscape of limitless possibility, where every shadowed cliff could hide a forgotten doorway. This is the story's enduring gift, a permission to wonder. So the next time you stand at the rim of the Grand Canyon, looking out over that immense sea of time carved in stone, let your eyes wander. Look past the official plaques and consider the whispers on the wind. Research the old newspaper accounts for yourself, walk the trails with a question in your mind, and decide where you stand in this century-old debate. Is this the ghost of history's greatest cover-up, or simply its most captivating campfire story? The answer, like the truth of the canyon itself, may be waiting just beneath the surface. Share your verdict in the comments below.